April 1945. Europe was in ruins. Cities reduced to rubble, rivers turned to graveyards, and the Third Reich was collapsing from the inside out. The Allies pressed in from the west. The Soviets surged from the east. It was the end. Everyone knew it. And in the chaos of those final days, a decorated German officer simply vanished. No orders, no final report, no witnesses, just gone. Colonel Wilhelm Krieger had served in nearly every major campaign of the war. He was a name that circulated in hushed tones across both Allied and Axis intelligence networks, not because of his brutality, but because of his silence. A ghost in a uniform. Always present on the edge of strategy meetings, always one step ahead of disaster. His men followed him without question, yet few could say they ever truly knew him. The colonel kept to himself, his past sealed tighter than the dossiers he carried. In April, as American tanks rolled into Bavaria and the war tipped from tragedy into surrender, Krieger was stationed at a remote outpost near the Black Forest. Then, in the middle of the night, he disappeared. His quarters undisturbed, uniform hanging neatly, pistol holstered, maps missing. One unfinished letter lay on the desk unsigned, unsent. The military assumed desertion. Soviet agents suspected espionage. Others whispered of a secret mission, one last operation buried in the ashes of a dying regime. But the war ended, the lines were redrawn, and Krieger's name slipped into the void, along with millions of others lost to time. For decades, he remained a footnote in forgotten files, mentioned only in scattered testimonies and the occasional conspiracy thread. Until 80 years later, when a hiker cutting through a dense stretch of forgotten forest spotted something strange beneath the moss, a slab of stone, carved symbols, a sealed door. What lay beyond would ignite a mystery that stretched from the ruins of Nazi Germany to the edge of modern imagination. A question resurrected after nearly a century. What really happened to Colonel Wilhelm Krieger? And why, after all this time, had his secrets refused to stay buried? To understand the disappearance, you have to understand the man. Colonel Wilhelm Krieger wasn't like other officers in the Wehrmacht. He didn't bark orders or chase medals. He studied, he listened. He moved through battlefields like a man navigating a puzzle. And to many, he was a puzzle wrapped in discipline, veiled in intellect, impossible to fully read. Born in 1903 to a family of historians in Dresden, Krieger was fluent in 5 languages before he turned 20. He studied military science, archaeology, and ancient religions. At university, he wrote papers on pre-Christian symbolism in Germanic ruins. His professors called him brilliant, but uneasy. Too serious for his age, always watching. By 1939, he had risen quickly through the ranks not because of political favor, but because of his mind. Krieger had an uncanny ability to anticipate Allied movements before they happened. He wasn't a Nazi ideologue. In fact, some suspected he quietly detested the party. He rarely attended public rallies, spoke carefully when asked about Hitler, and was said to have protected several Jewish scholars during the early purges, though nothing was ever proven. But there were darker rumors that he was involved in artifact recovery missions across North Africa, that he once led a unit deep into the Caucasus on a mission that never made it into official records, that he didn't just study ancient symbols, he believed in them. Krieger was known to carry a personal map, hand-drawn and heavily annotated, filled with notations in Latin, Greek, and runes no one could decipher. Some said it was nonsense. Others believed it was a key to what no one could say. His last confirmed location was near the southern edge of the Black Forest, Bavaria, April 10, 1945. A lone motorbike, a leather satchel, no convoy, no guards. He was seen entering the woods by a local farmer around dusk. The sun was low, the roads were crumbling, the war was ending, and Wilhelm Krieger was walking into the trees like he had somewhere to be, somewhere no one else could follow. He didn't vanish in battle. He vanished on purpose. The only question was why. And what, if anything, he planned to take with him. In the weeks following Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence worked around the clock gathering names, interrogating prisoners, and chasing whispers. One of those whispers kept surfacing, vague at first, then insistent. A German officer with high-level clearance. Not captured, not confirmed dead. A ghost with knowledge no one was supposed to have. They called him Der Schatten, the Shadow. And according to intercepted Soviet transmissions, he carried information that could alter the post-war balance. Hidden vaults beneath the Alps. Transport schedules for stolen artwork. A cache of gold large enough to restart an empire. His name wasn't on any official Allied list, but American codebreakers finally pinned it down. Wilhelm Krieger. A recon unit was dispatched to a stretch of remote woodland near the Franconian line. Locals had reported seeing a strange vehicle weeks earlier, a military motorcycle left half covered in fallen leaves. When soldiers arrived, they found it still there, rusted from spring rains, no damage, no sign of struggle, just abandoned. The trail led nowhere. No tire marks, no footprints, just the oppressive silence of the forest. Except for one thing. Tucked into the bike's leather saddlebag was a silver cigarette case, smooth and polished as if it had just been cleaned. On the lid, etched into the metal, were unfamiliar symbols, not swastikas or military insignias, but a spiral of interlocking runes. None of the soldiers recognized the markings. One assumed it was decorative. Another said it looked like Celtic script. No one could read it, but it felt deliberate, planted, left behind, not in haste, but like a marker or a warning. The case was logged and shipped to a secure facility outside Munich. A few days later, it disappeared from inventory. The clerk who signed it in had no memory of doing so. The logbook page had been torn out. Back at the forest site, the commanding officer ordered a sweep of the surrounding woods. They found nothing. No bunker, no trail, no body. Just an eerie stillness, the kind that doesn't feel empty, it feels watched. Wilhelm Krieger had stepped off the edge of history, and whatever he'd taken with him, secrets, gold, or something far stranger, had vanished too. What happens when a mystery goes unsolved for too long? It doesn't disappear, it just gets buried. Over the next few years, Krieger's name would surface again in whispers, in rumors, in redacted field reports that all led nowhere. Intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain showed a quiet but persistent interest in the missing colonel. But every trail ended the same way: classified, sealed, forgotten. In Washington, a memo from 1946 described Krieger as an individual of tactical brilliance and unknown allegiance, possibly in possession of high-value Reich assets. One CIA operative flagged him as a potential recruitment target if found alive, but he wasn't. So they moved on. In Moscow, the KGB compiled a profile under the codename Owl. Their analysts believed Krieger had escaped with documents outlining Soviet weaknesses on the Eastern Front. A note scrawled in pencil in the margins of his file read, "Find the forest, find the truth." The file was locked away. It never saw light again. As the Cold War heated up, Krieger's case faded like a ghost, swallowed by more pressing threats. Nuclear arms, Berlin, Vietnam. His disappearance became a curiosity for fringe analysts and obsessive archivists, nothing more. Something that didn't fit the narrative, so it was pushed into a drawer and forgotten, until 1990. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, as East and West Germany rejoined like fractured bones resetting, the newly unified government began unsealing wartime archives. Thousands of documents, memos, testimonies, satellite photos. Among them, barely noticed, was a microfilm reel stamped, "Krieger, status, unknown." It included an early draft of the American intelligence profile, a photo of the cigarette case, and a blurry, undated aerial image of a strange clearing deep in the Franconian forest. No roads, no structures. Just a faint circle carved into the earth, like the imprint of something that once stood there. But no one paid attention. Not yet. The Cold War had just ended. The world had moved on, and the story of a missing Nazi colonel with his maps and artifacts and coded symbols sounded more like folklore than fact. For now, the forest kept its silence. But secrets like these don't stay buried forever. Spring, 2025. The Franconian forest is quiet this time of year. The trees sway gently. Wildflowers push up through last autumn's decay. For most, it's just another trail system winding paths, forgotten war bunkers, the kind of place history clings to like fog. But for 8-year-old Hans Keller, a retired forest ranger who spent decades walking these woods, it was personal. He wasn't looking for anything. He just missed the silence, until he found something that changed everything. It started with a strange slope of moss that felt wrong, too flat, too deliberate, something beneath the surface. Keller knelt, brushing away layers of wet green, revealing a slab of carved stone embedded in the hillside. Symbols, faint but precise, stretched in a circular pattern around a rusted metal handle. It looked more like a vault than a door. Most would have walked away. Keller didn't. With effort, he heaved the stone aside, revealing a narrow tunnel behind it. Air poured out stale, cold, untouched. He stepped inside with nothing but a headlamp and 30 years of instinct. The passage curved slightly, the rock giving way to timber beams and rotting support posts. About 20 feet in, he reached it. A door, wooden, half-collapsed, blackened by time but still holding. Behind it, a single chamber. Dust floated in the beam of his light. Tools rusted beyond recognition lay where they had fallen. A shattered lantern. Military boots. Crates of supplies marked with faded German script. But it was what sat on the center table that stopped his breath. A journal, perfectly preserved inside a sealed tin box. The leather binding cracked with age, but the pages inside were legible, handwritten in German. Wilhelm Krieger's name signed in ink on the first page. Dozens of entries followed. Dates from April to August, 1945. Some written in neat script, others scrawled, desperate, many in a mix of languages. Keller backed out slowly, adrenaline rising. He didn't know who Krieger was, but someone would. He took only the journal. Reported the site. Within 48 hours, military historians and intelligence analysts descended on the forest. News didn't leak, not yet. Officially, nothing had been found. Unofficially, the question had changed. Krieger didn't just vanish. He prepared. And whatever he was hiding from, he believed it would come looking. The chamber was deeper than anyone expected. Once the team cleared the passage and reinforced the collapsing tunnel, they discovered what Keller's flashlight had barely hinted at: a complete, self-contained World War II-era hideout, sealed away like a tomb. The air was cold, still, perfectly preserved in silence. The layout was simple. 2 bunks, small and metal-framed, with wool blankets folded military tight. A wood-burning stove, rusted but intact. Shelves lined with tinned rations stamped 1944. A radio, antenna detached, resting on a makeshift desk stacked with maps. And then the books. Lining the far wall were dozens of volumes, their spines brittle, many in Latin, others in German and French. There were military manuals, sure. Weather almanacs, topographic surveys. But nestled among them were titles that didn't belong. Esoteric treatises, books with symbols instead of titles, parchment-bound notebooks with diagrams of the human body overlaid with astrological signs. One volume was written entirely in mirrored script. At the back of the bunker, painted directly on the concrete wall, was a symbol 6 feet wide, a compass rose, but twisted. The cardinal directions were replaced by unrecognizable glyphs, some resembling Norse runes, others entirely alien. The paint hadn't faded. It looked fresh, almost wet. Beneath it, a single phrase in Krieger's handwriting: "Not all maps lead out." The journal recovered by Keller confirmed what investigators feared. Krieger had intended to vanish. His entries grew darker the deeper they read. He wrote of visions, of voices in the trees, of a mission that went beyond politics, beyond war. One passage described a dream in which he followed a burning map through an endless forest, only to wake with soot on his fingers. Forensics revealed no signs of other inhabitants, no second handwriting, no second set of prints. The food supplies could have lasted a single man 6 months, maybe longer with rationing. And yet, Krieger's final entry was dated August 12, 1945, 4 months after the war ended. He had survived. Alone. Possibly longer. But why here? Why this place? And more importantly, what was he waiting for? Something in this bunker wasn't just about escape, it was preparation. A sanctuary, a shrine, a prison. And the compass on the wall wasn't just a symbol, it was a direction. The journal was written in 3 distinct phases. The first, dated April 1945, was orderly, methodical, the precise language of a soldier executing a mission. Krieger referred to it only once by name, Operation Eulenspiegel. There was no explanation, no directive, just a note in the margin beside a map fragment. He who hides truth behind a mirror never sees it break. Over the following weeks, the entries grew more fragmented. Krieger documented his routine collecting rainwater, tracking phases of the moon, cataloging local flora. But between these mundane details, something darker took root. He began referring to watchers in the forest, not soldiers, not animals. Something else. They do not step on leaves, he wrote. Their silence is not natural. It bends the air. One page detailed a dream where the trees whispered in a language he couldn't speak, yet somehow understood. In another, he claimed to hear knocking on the stone from the outside, always just after dusk, but no one was there. Then came the third phase, the unraveling. His handwriting deteriorated. German gave way to Latin, then to symbols that matched the compass on the wall. Phrases repeated over and over like mantras. Cleansing comes in silence. Do not trust the sky. The old maps lie. There were no entries after August 12th. No farewell. No final thoughts. Just blank pages and one torn out, missing entirely. Analysts believed Krieger was succumbing to isolation, but a few weren't so sure. His notes were too deliberate, too structured, even in madness. He hadn't just hidden, he had prepared for something he believed was inevitable. Not a Soviet capture, not Allied prosecution, something older. He wasn't trying to escape the war. He was trying to survive something after it. As interest in the bunker grew, new files were pulled from archives long thought to be irrelevant. Among them were classified OSS reports suggesting Krieger had knowledge of missing Reich gold assets never recovered after Germany's collapse. Several wartime shipments bound for Berlin were rerouted and never arrived. The operation? Unnamed. The location? Unknown. But one name appeared multiple times, Krieger. More disturbing were intelligence memos from 1947 mentioning a secretive group of former officers moving between Germany, Spain, and South America. A smuggling ring, loosely connected through false identities, stolen artwork, and gold coins stamped with Nazi insignias. Krieger's name was flagged not as a suspect, but as someone to approach with caution if located. Then came the first human clue. An elderly woman in a Bavarian village, 96 years old and fading, told her grandson a story she had kept for decades. In 1948, she said, a tall man with a thick coat and strange eyes came to her door. He didn't ask for shelter, he offered gold for food. Bars stamped with Reich symbols. When she asked who he was, he said nothing, just nodded toward the woods and walked away. He didn't blink, she said, and he never left tracks in the snow. Authorities dismissed the account as senile fantasy until she described the cigarette case in perfect detail. So was Krieger alone? Satellite scans of the Franconian forest revealed several heat signatures beneath the earth, buried and overgrown, suggesting connected structures, not just a one-off bunker. Nearby, an old hunter's shack burned down in 1952 under mysterious circumstances. No cause was ever determined, but scorched beneath the floorboards were wiring diagrams in German and a schematic for a portable radio capable of reaching across the Atlantic. These weren't the plans of a man in hiding, they were the fingerprints of a network. The question wasn't just whether Krieger was part of something bigger, it was whether he had started it. And if so, what had they been trying to hide or protect? A new theory began to emerge, not from officials, but from historians and former intelligence analysts who knew how to read between redactions. What if Krieger hadn't gone rogue to protect himself but to protect others? Inside his journal, several entries listed names most crossed out, some marked with symbols. At first, they appeared random, but when cross-referenced with OSS archives and Allied war logs, the names lined up with known resistance fighters, smuggling contacts, and underground railroad operatives who helped Jewish families and defectors escape Nazi-occupied territories. Even more striking were the margin notes scrawled beside Krieger's map sketches: coordinates, arrows, phrases in English, French, even Yiddish. In one torn corner, barely legible beneath a water stain, were 3 words: "Help them escape." Other entries referenced escape corridors later confirmed to have been used by Allied-backed safe routes, paths used to smuggle persecuted groups out of occupied zones. Krieger hadn't just known about them, he may have designed them. If true, it meant the decorated colonel was operating as a double agent, not for another government, but for something harder to define: conscience. One theory posits that Krieger had been planning his defection for years. That Operation Eulenspiegel wasn't an escape plan, but a final act of sabotage. He had access to Nazi supply lines, classified convoy routes, and relocation plans for stolen art and gold. If he couldn't stop the war, he could at least scatter its pieces. But there's another layer. Several of Krieger's entries speak of guilt, not just fear. He refers to the debt and to those I couldn't save in time. At one point he writes, "The bunker is not a refuge, it is a reckoning." The compass painted on the wall may not have been a navigational tool, but a marker pointing not to escape but to responsibility, a place to face what he had done, or what he had failed to do. So, did he vanish to protect a hoard of stolen gold? Or did he disappear to bury something far more dangerous, the truth? Whatever the answer, Krieger's role in the war was no longer black and white. It was something far murkier and far more human. When the first teams arrived with portable LiDAR scanners, they expected to map a single sealed bunker, a curiosity, a relic of the war. What they found instead was a pattern. Beneath the dense canopy of the Franconian forest, invisible to the naked eye, a spiderweb of voids appeared on their monitors. Multiple underground chambers, some partially collapsed, others still intact, all connected by what had once been narrow tunnels. On the surface, nothing betrayed their existence, just moss, roots, and silence. But underground, the story shifted. The walls were scorched in places, indicating fires had been built to keep warm. Crude weather instruments fashioned from glass jars and copper wire were tucked into niches. Scattered about were shoes, worn down to fabric and thread, soles split from years of use. A tin plate with tally marks etched into it, dozens, maybe hundreds. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a life. Forensic teams examined the debris. Some shoes were too small to belong to Krieger. A child's leather strap, a woman's heel, nothing matched official records. Whoever they were, they had been here, lived here, vanished here. No names, no bodies, only echoes. The LiDAR images extended for nearly a kilometer, hinting at a system built with intention, not by a desperate man scratching at stone, but by someone who had planned to endure. It raised a question no one could answer. Was Krieger truly alone in his exile? Or had he built a network, a sanctuary, even a prison? The journal hinted at watchers and mirrors, but never named names. His supply caches, rationing schedules, and hidden maps suggested logistics beyond one person. Yet there were no signatures, no handwriting but his. For 80 years, the forest held its silence. The tunnels collapsed one by one, moss grew over the entrances, trees swallowed the clearings. But the question remained, sitting heavy as the earth itself. Was Wilhelm Krieger hiding from the world, or was the world hiding what Wilhelm Krieger had become? Deep in the journal, near the back where the paper yellowed and curled, was a final cluster of entries dated 1957, 12 years after the war had ended. No one had expected to see dates so late. It meant Krieger had survived far longer than anyone thought. Possibly more than a decade in the bunker. Possibly never leaving at all. But the tone had changed. Gone was the precise soldier's handwriting, the maps and lists and measurements. The script wandered like a fever. Sentences trailed off mid-thought. Languages blended German, Latin, symbols. Whole pages were filled with repeating phrases. Shadows, remember. The forest keeps what it takes, the price of survival. One entry described voices in the woods. Not animals, not soldiers, voices. They knock at the stone when the moon is low, he wrote. They do not eat, they do not sleep, but they remember me. Another page mentioned the ones beneath the roots and a mirror I cannot break. And then, the last line written in a shaky hand across a torn page, they will come for me when silence returns. It was the last thing Krieger ever wrote. No signature, no date beyond 1957. After that, the journal stopped cold, as though the ink itself had frozen. Was this madness, the slow unspooling of a man lost in isolation? Or had Krieger truly seen something in the forest, something older than war, older than even the land itself? Investigators don't know. Some call it paranoia, others call it a confession. A few whisper about experiments, occult rituals, or a network so secret it spanned decades. All anyone can say for sure is that in 1957, Wilhelm Krieger was still alive, still writing, and still waiting. For what or for whom no one can say. But the forest does not forget, and neither do the shadows. Today, the site is cordoned off by temporary fencing and guarded by silence. No official statement has been issued, no public display. But word spreads fast. The story of Wilhelm Krieger, the vanished colonel, the hidden bunker, the journal written into madness, has become more than just a rediscovery. It's a phenomenon. Historians want to dissect the facts, the logistics of his survival, the possible links to Nazi gold, the tactical brilliance of a man who slipped through the cracks of history. Military scholars study his notes, trying to decode maps that don't match known terrain. Linguists are still debating the meaning of the compass symbols painted on the wall. Then there are the others. Conspiracy theorists claim Krieger was part of a shadow network that outlived the Reich, a secret order built on occult science and buried relics. Some believe he was guarding something, others think he was running from it. A few say he never died, that he left the forest through paths no longer visible to the rest of us. Paranormal researchers see something different. They focus on the final journal entries, the voices, the watchers, the line, "They will come for me when silence returns." A phrase now quoted across message boards, podcasts, late-night documentaries. They claim there are electromagnetic disturbances in the area, that cameras glitch near the bunker, that no birds nest within 200 meters of the site. But for all the theories, the debates, the headlines, one thing remains unchanged. Krieger's body was never found. The journal ends. The boots remain under the bed. The compass still points nowhere. But the man himself? Gone. No bones, no grave. Just a void in the earth where something once breathed, feared, waited. Was he a war criminal who vanished to escape justice? Was he a hidden hero, saving lives in secret from the inside? Or was he something else entirely, a man who saw the world collapsing and chose to walk into the trees, not to flee, but to disappear for reasons no one will ever truly understand? The only thing we know for certain is this: for 80 years, a man the world forgot lived and possibly died in the silence of the forest, and the forest, patient as time, never gave him back. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.